Sociology Robot. Hello and welcome to the 11th video lecture for OCR A Level Sociology, looking at Agencies of Socialization. Agencies of socialization are the groups of important people in your life who socialize you, who introduce you to the norms and values of society. The OCR exam board wants you to know about 6 of these, and we'll look at them in turn. First of all, the family as an agency of socialization. You've already been introduced to the family as an agency of socialization through the idea of primary socialization, this first experience of training that introduces you to the basic norms and values of society when you're just a child. You've also been introduced to the sociologist Talcott Parsons, who has a lot to say about family life. Parsons argues that the nuclear family is the most effective form of family living for socializing children. This sort of socialization is particularistic. This term means that your family socializes you into their particular take on society's norms and values, their way of doing things. And later you internalize this. That becomes your own outlook on life. Now, this is great if your family have got very positive views, but of course the family can socialize you into particular forms of prejudice and bigotry. Some examples of family socialization include learning language when you learn to speak, potty training of course, and self-control, and the family socializes you into self-control through discipline at home, like the naughty step. In addition, there are gender roles, and you observe your parents and their behaviour, and you become socialised into your expectations of masculine and feminine roles. We can evaluate the family from the different perspectives that you already know about. Functionalism takes a very positive view of the family and of primary socialization by the family, but it often worries that the nuclear family is under threat. For example, in 2017, in this country, there were 78,000 fewer marriages than there had been back in 1991. And for functionalists, this decline in the family can only have bad effects on the socialization of children. Marxists, as you would expect, take a different view, and you've been introduced to Eli Zaretsky, who argues that what the family is really doing is socializing children into accepting capitalism, so that they will grow up to be good workers in the capitalist system. And feminists like Anne Oakley will argue that what the family is really doing is socializing children into oppressive gender roles, where, for example, the men get to sit about while the women do domestic work and care for children. I remember this board game from my own childhood, Battleship, and this old-fashioned box art has got some interesting details in it. You see the father and the son enjoying a relaxing game, but do you notice, in the top right corner, mother and daughter following their gender roles? Sociologists like to point out how childhood games and activities cause us to accept these gender roles as normal and natural. Next, let's look at peer groups as agencies of socialization. Your peer group is, of course, particularly important during adolescence. Most sociologists would agree that your peers enable you to form an identity away from your family. Peer groups are strongly linked to youth subcultures, and they're often associated with deviant behaviours. Examples of peer group socialization include following fashions and seeking popularity, but also experimenting with drink, drugs, and sex. Peer groups do this socialization, yes, through encouraging you to try things and to join in their activities, but also by excluding you when you don't do or say or think what they want. This is a very powerful tool for shaping people's behaviour. Let's use the perspectives to evaluate these. The functionalist Shmuel Eisenstadt argues that peer groups help young people to integrate into society. They act as a kind of trial run at the sort of things that society is going to expect of you, so that you can make mistakes with your peer group and correct them without lasting consequences, and get yourself ready to join the adult world. A slightly different functionalist view comes from Albert Cohen, who sees working class youths as suffering from status frustration. They struggle at school because they don't have the resources that middle class kids have got, and they react by forming a deviant anti-school subculture. Marxists have got a very different view on youth subcultures. Dick Hebdiger focuses on punks in particular in the 1970s and argues that youth is a symbolic resistance to capitalism, that young people recognise the capitalist world as a terrible place and they don't want anything to do with it, and they defy it through fashion and music and deviant forms of behaviour. Unfortunately, eventually they're forced to give up on these rebellious principles and join the adult workforce. But Hebdiger thinks that for a brief period, young people are actually seeing the world as it really is. They don't like it. A similar view comes from McRobbie and Garber, who focus on the bedroom culture of teenage girls. And they argue that girls also go through a symbolic resistance to patriarchy, to the male-orientated adult world that they're going to be forced to join, but recognise as a rather oppressive place. You can see that functionalists then regard peer groups as something like a cocoon. When you're a child, then you're a little caterpillar, you enter the cocoon and you emerge as an adult butterfly. The cocoon is a kind of transitional phase. Marxists and feminists aren't so sure about that. They think that instead of the cocoon just being this transitional phase, it's in fact when we're in our peer groups in our teenage years that we actually understand things clearly. And it's later on, when we join the adult world, that we are bamboozled by ideology and lose our sense of what's really going on. Next, let's look at the media as an agency of socialization. Of course, we're talking here about TV, film, radio, the internet, comics, books, adverts, and also, very importantly, social media, which links, of course, to peer groups. Media can be seen as a form of re-socialization for adults, keeping them locked in to the norms and values of society. And the media often does this through providing us with role models. We can see some examples of this in the way that children's films and TV introduce gender roles. Disney princesses would be a very good example of that. They also introduce us to the boundaries of acceptable behaviour, in which we see rule breakers being punished. However, there are concerns that the media can normalise deviant behaviour, making it seem acceptable to people. Think back to the incident in 2022 when the actor Will Smith slapped the presenter Chris Rock at the Oscars ceremony. Functionalists have got a mixed view on the media as an agency of socialisation. They're very concerned that it will undermine the primary socialisation being carried out by parents. However, they also recognise that it can support society's norms and values with positive messages. Marxists like Jock Young argue that the media helps create a bulimic society, and by this he means a society where we're constantly greedy for more, but always unsatisfied, because the media is filling our heads with advertisements and the desire for fashionable and up-to-date consumer goods. Feminists often take a critical view of the media. They point out how it often objectifies women's bodies, promotes pornography and what they call rape culture, this notion that it's acceptable, it's normative to view women as sex objects. However, fourth wave feminists argue that social media can empower women, and you need to know about Laura Bates, who started the Everyday Sexism Project in 2012. This was a website, later a book, in which women share their testimonies of the sort of sexism and abuse that they experience in everyday life and support each other. And this challenges the idea that sexism and sexual abuse is normal and should be accepted. A good example of these contradictory views of the media might be in a TV show like Love Island. Many feminists would complain that it objectifies women through their bodies, and many functionalists would have a concern that it is introducing children to sexual messages at too young an age. However, the show could be seen as promoting positive ideas about relationships based on trust and communication. Next, let's take a look at religion as an agency of socialization. The UK today is largely a secular society where religion doesn't have a huge impact on public life. That would make religion a declining agency of socialization. But it is still important in particular communities and is often seen as a source of moral values for young people growing up, running food banks, for example. Religion also provides norms for young people to follow, norms about dress, about diet, and about sexual behaviour. Of course, it also provides people with a sense of belonging to a community. Examples of religious socialization would include teaching children Bible stories with strong moral messages to them, and getting children to participate in festivals that unite them with their community. Religions offer ceremonies that mark rites of passage in life. Here you can see in the Catholic Church a young girl receiving First Communion. That's kind of a mark that you are growing up and no longer a child. And of course there are faith schools where religion is heavily involved in a child's entire education. Functionalists tend to have a positive view of the influence of religion. Durkheim argues that religion is really worshipping society itself, so by encouraging children to be religious, you're encouraging them to value society even more. But Marxists reject this idea. Marx famously calls religion the opium of the people, suggesting that religion has the effect of drugging people so that they don't notice and can't do anything about the way they're being exploited. Many feminists are hostile to the idea of traditional religion, which they see as passing on patriarchal ideology and traditional gender roles. For example, God is usually represented as male, and women are often represented as weak and sinful in many religious stories. Religion as an agency of socialization can come into conflict with other agencies. Here, for example, we've got religious parents complaining about sex education going on in primary schools. And that'll take us into the next topic, which is education as an agency of socialization. Education is, of course, secondary socialization. It picks up from the primary socialization offered by parents and develops that, teaching more complex skills than children will learn at home. It offers a universalistic socialization compared to the particularistic socialization you get at home. In other words, your parents socialize you into their particular norms and values, whereas school tries to socialize you into more universal values and norms found throughout society. Examples of this sort of socialization would be the PHSE, Personal Health and Social Education, and the teaching of British values in the school curriculum. Of course, schools also discipline children with detentions and exclusions and have reward systems as well, so they're training you to behave. Now, functionalism is broadly in favour of this, but does sometimes have concerns when schools conflict with the family. However, functionalists do think that schools are supposed to take over from the primary socialization by the family because it's really important that children learn universalistic values. Marxists like Bowles and Gintis argue that schools are really passing on capitalist ideology. They point out three things about schools: that they encourage children to accept hierarchy, the idea that some people are just their superiors who can't be questioned, authority figures. And they encourage children to value external rewards, grades and marks and gold stars, rather than enjoying things for its own sake. And schools also fragment knowledge into lots of different subjects. And this prepares you for working in a capitalist workforce where you have a boss that you can't question, where the job is unsatisfying but you get paid for it, and the job is also fragmented, that you never get to see the complete product of the thing that you're contributing towards making. Feminists are often concerned that schools channel boys and girls into different subjects and careers, usually sending boys into the more prestigious subjects and the better paid careers. They can detect patriarchal ideology at work in the curriculum and even in features like school uniform with the different dress codes for males and females. Back in 2021, former schoolgirl Soma Sarah set up a website called Everyone's Invited. She had experienced sexual abuse herself at one of London's top private schools, and the website invited other schoolgirls to come forward with their testimonies. And 10,000 did, reporting their experiences of rape culture in some of the top schools in Britain. Finally, let's look at the workplace as an agency of socialisation. The workplace could be considered tertiary socialisation. It's a form of re-socialisation. It reinforces the norms and values of adult life. Now, the workplace can also provide a subculture. For example, the police canteen culture has been criticised, where police recruits are introduced to a subculture where sexist attitudes and racist attitudes are acceptable. The workplace socialises you through encouraging respect for punctuality and organisation, hierarchy, once again, accepting that some people are your superiors and should not be questioned. Health and safety rules could be seen as part of workplace socialisation, and so of course is the fear of getting fired. Now, functionalists think that the world of work is very important for re-socialisation. They're concerned that long-term unemployment could lead to socialisation wearing off. Marxists also think that the workplace is really important, but for a slightly different reason. They think it's a source of class identity, particularly working class identity. Certainly there was a time when millions of people worked in massive factories and entire communities would work alongside each other and share a common experience of work. Increasingly, though, people don't work in these big factories, and that could be seen as a criticism of the Marxist view of class and of the sort of arguments put forward by Bowles and Gintis in the previous section. For feminists, the workplace is somewhere where inequality is normalised, made to seem natural and unremarkable and perfectly acceptable. Feminists campaign about a glass ceiling, an invisible barrier for women seeking promotion. Instead, women are consigned to the 4 C's, working in catering, caring, cleaning and cooking, all jobs which don't carry much status and are quite low paid. Let's finish with a look at some exam questions. Question number 1 is always a 6 marker. Explain using examples how the workplace can be an agency of socialisation. They'll be looking for a couple of sociological points about social class and re-socialisation, and then some examples of the sort of experiences that people have in the workplace of following the rules and obeying their bosses and avoiding getting fired. Question 2 introduces you to 2 sources and asks you to use them and your wider sociological knowledge to explain, for example, how the media is an agency of socialisation. Here you would say what you see. In the picture on the left, you can see a group of children not talking to each other, all absorbed in their screens. And many would see this as something that is interfering with the valuable primary socialisation that they're supposed to be getting from their parents at that age. And from source B, you can take quotes and link them to sociological ideas. So it says that children are spending more and more time on their tablets, watching TV and surfing the internet, and it's cutting into their time with friends. And you could link this to a functionalist idea that the children, if they miss out on primary socialisation, will experience anomie later in life. Question number 3 is the essay question. Outline and briefly evaluate the view that here the family is declining importance as an agency of socialisation. You need 3 main points here. You can argue that the family is important for introducing children to basic norms and values. You could argue that the family is in a way not important because it is particularistic compared to the universalistic values of the school. And you can argue that the family is not important because it is really introducing children to the ideology of capitalism, which perhaps they could do without. And then you also need to evaluate these ideas, linking them to Marxism and functionalism, and saying something about what's right and what's wrong with them. I hope that has been a valuable overview. There's a lot more about agencies of socialization in my study guide for socialization, culture and identity, and in the combined study guide with youth subcultures, both of which are available from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Sociology Robot.